The lonely hunter rescues an orphan child and finds a new reason to live. An unexpected family. Welcome to today's story about redemption, family, and second chances in the American Old West. You're about to witness how a solitary hunter's life completely transforms when he encounters an orphan child in the wilderness. It's a tale of unexpected bonds and the healing power of human connection. Before we begin, if you already enjoy this type of content, leave your like to support me. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly before Jonas McKinnon as he guided his weathered horse through the dense pine forest. The year was 1882, and the morning mist clung to the mountains like ghostly fingers, creating an ethereal silence that had become his only companion over the past 15 years. Jonas preferred it this way: the solitude, the predictability of nature, the absence of human complications that had once torn his world apart. At 43, Jonas bore the weathered face of a man who had lived hard and loved harder, only to lose everything that mattered. His calloused hands gripped the reins with practiced ease, while his pale blue eyes scanned the forest floor for cracks. Hunting wasn't just his profession, it was his escape from memories that still haunted him in the quiet hours before dawn. The morning air carried the crisp scent of pine needles and the distant promise of snow. Jonas had been tracking a wounded elk for 2 days now, following its blood trail through increasingly treacherous terrain. The animal had taken an arrow from an inexperienced hunter in the valley below, and Jonas felt obligated to end its suffering. It was a code he lived by: clean kills, no unnecessary pain, respect for the creatures that sustained him. As he dismounted near a small creek, Jonas heard something that made him freeze. It wasn't the rustle of leaves or the crack of branches that typically announced an animal's presence. This was different, a soft, muffled sound that didn't belong in his wilderness sanctuary. He tied his horse to a sturdy oak and approached the sound with the silent steps that had made him legendary among the trappers and traders who occasionally crossed his path. Through a cluster of elderberry bushes, Jonas discovered something that shattered his carefully constructed solitude. A child, no more than 8 years old, sat huddled against the base of a massive pine tree. The boy's clothes were torn and filthy, his dark hair matted with dirt and leaves. Most disturbing were his eyes, wide, brown pools of terror that seemed to look right through Jonas, as if he were just another threat in a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. "Easy there, son," Jonas whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. He slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child pressed himself harder against the tree trunk, his small frame trembling like a leaf in autumn wind. Jonas could see scratches on the boy's arms and a nasty bruise along his left cheek. Someone had hurt this child, and recently. "What's your name?" Jonas asked, crouching down to make himself less imposing. The boy remained silent, but his eyes tracked Jonas's every movement with the wariness of a trapped animal. Jonas studied the surrounding area and found the remnants of what appeared to be a small campsite about 50 yards away. Scattered belongings, overturned pots, and dark stains on the ground told a grim story. Whatever had happened here, this child was likely the only survivor. "Are you hungry?" Jonas asked, slowly reaching into his saddlebag for a piece of dried beef. The boy's eyes locked onto the food, but he made no move to take it when Jonas placed it on the ground between them. The wind picked up, sending a chill through the forest that made the child shiver violently. Jonas noticed the boy's lips had taken on a bluish tint, and his breathing came in short, sharp bursts. Hypothermia was setting in, and if Jonas didn't act soon, he'd be looking at a tragedy he was powerless to prevent. "Listen, son," Jonas said, his voice taking on an urgency he hadn't felt in years. "I know you're scared, and I know you don't know me from Adam, but if you stay out here much longer, you're going to freeze to death. I've got a warm cabin about 5 miles north, with food and a fire. Will you let me help you?" For the first time, the boy spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They killed them all." The words hit Jonas like a physical blow. In those 4 simple words, he heard an echo of his own pain, his own loss, his own desperate struggle to make sense of a world that could be unspeakably cruel to the innocent. "I know," Jonas replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "But you're alive, and that means something. That means you're stronger than whatever happened back there. If you're enjoying the story so far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it helps a lot." Slowly, carefully, Jonas approached the child. When the boy didn't retreat further, Jonas gently wrapped him in his own wool coat. The child was ice-cold, and lighter than he should have been, suggesting he'd been without proper food for several days. "What's your name, son?" Jonas asked again, as he lifted the boy onto his horse. Thomas, came the whispered reply. Well, Thomas, I'm Jonas, and I promise you, as long as there's breath in my body, nobody's going to hurt you again. As they rode toward Jonas's cabin, the hunter found himself making a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, to a child he'd never expected to find, in a life he'd thought was destined for solitude. The silence that had been his comfort for so long suddenly felt different, not peaceful, but empty. And for the first time in 15 years, Jonas McKinnon began to wonder if there might be room in his world for something more than survival. Jonas's cabin sat nestled in a grove of aspen trees, their golden leaves creating a natural canopy that filtered the afternoon sunlight into dancing patterns on the weathered wood walls. The structure was modest but solid: 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. It had been his sanctuary for over a decade, a place where the outside world couldn't touch him. Thomas hadn't spoken since revealing his name during their ride. He sat stiffly in Jonas's only chair, still wrapped in the wool coat, his eyes darting around the cabin like a cornered animal seeking escape routes. The boy flinched every time Jonas moved, no matter how slowly or deliberately. Jonas busied himself with practical matters, partly to give Thomas space, and partly because he genuinely didn't know how to handle the situation. He'd been alone for so long that even basic conversation felt foreign. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken trauma and uncertainty. I'm going to make some stew, Jonas announced, more to fill the quiet than because he expected a response. Nothing fancy, just rabbit and vegetables. You look like you could use a good meal. As Jonas worked at the stove, he found himself stealing glances at the boy. Thomas was small for his age, with delicate features that suggested he came from good stock. His clothes, though torn and dirty, had once been well made. This wasn't a street orphan or a wild child. He'd been loved, cared for, part of a family that was now gone. The aroma of cooking food gradually filled the cabin, and Jonas noticed Thomas's posture begin to relax slightly. Hunger, it seemed, was stronger than fear. When Jonas ladled the stew into a bowl and placed it on the table, beside Thomas, the boy's eyes followed every movement. Go ahead, Jonas encouraged. It's not poisoned, I promise. Thomas picked up the spoon with trembling hands and took a tentative bite. Then another. Soon he was eating with the desperate efficiency of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Jonas felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when he'd found injured animals. The urge to heal and protect. Slow down there, son, Jonas said gently. It's not going anywhere. For the first time, Thomas looked directly at him. Thank you, he whispered. Those 2 words cracked something open in Jonas that he'd thought was permanently sealed. He turned away, ostensibly to tend the fire, but really to compose himself. He couldn't remember the last time someone had thanked him for anything. As evening approached, Jonas faced a dilemma he hadn't anticipated. Where was Thomas going to sleep? The cabin had only 1 bed, and Jonas hadn't considered the sleeping arrangements when he'd brought the boy home. He found himself pulling extra blankets from his trunk, fashioning a makeshift bed near the fireplace. This should keep you warm, he said, arranging the blankets. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. Thomas climbed into the improvised bed without complaint, though Jonas noticed he positioned himself so he could see both the door and the window. Even in relative safety, the boy was planning his escape routes. Jonas settled into his chair with a cup of coffee, staring into the fire and trying to process the day's events. He'd rescued animals before, nursed them back to health, and released them into the wild. But Thomas wasn't a wounded deer or an orphaned fox. He was a human child with complex needs that Jonas wasn't sure he could meet. Jonas, Thomas's voice, cut through the crackling of the fire. Yeah, son. Are you going to send me away? The question hit Jonas harder than he'd expected. In those 6 words, he heard every fear, every abandonment, every betrayal that Thomas had experienced. He also heard an echo of his own childhood, when he'd been shuffled between relatives who saw him as more burden than blessing. No, Jonas said, and he surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. You're safe here, Thomas, for as long as you need to be. Leave a comment about what you think of this story so far. The next morning brought their first real test. Jonas woke to find Thomas standing by the window, fully dressed in his torn clothes, clutching a small leather pouch that Jonas hadn't noticed before. You don't have to run, Jonas said quietly. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're afraid of, we can work through it. Thomas turned, and Jonas saw tears streaming down his face. They came at night, he whispered. Ma said to hide in the root cellar and not come out no matter what I heard. But I heard everything. Jonas felt his heart break for this brave little boy who'd survived something no child should ever witness. He wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but he sensed that Thomas needed to tell his story in his own way, at his own pace. They were looking for Pa's gold, Thomas continued. But Pa's never had no gold. He was just a farmer. Ma tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. How long were you in that cellar? Jonas asked. 2 days, maybe 3. I was so scared and hungry, I finally came out. That's when I ran. I just kept running until I couldn't run anymore. Jonas knelt down to Thomas's eye level. That was very brave, son. Your ma and pa would be proud of how strong you've been. But I couldn't save them. Thomas sobbed. I just hid like a coward. You survived, Jonas said firmly. That's not cowardice, Thomas. That's following your ma's last instruction. She wanted you to live, and you did exactly what she asked. Over the following days, a tentative routine began to develop. Jonas would rise early to check his traps and hunt for food, always returning by midday. Thomas would help with simple chores around the cabin, gathering firewood, organizing supplies, tending the small vegetable garden Jonas had neglected. The boy was quick to learn and eager to contribute, as if proving his worth would guarantee his place in Jonas's world. Jonas recognized the behavior because he'd done the same thing as a child, working desperately to earn love and security that should have been freely given. One afternoon, while teaching Thomas to clean and prepare a rabbit for dinner, Jonas made a decision that surprised even himself. Thomas, he said, setting down his knife, I want you to know something. You don't have to earn your place here. You belong here because I say you belong here. Not because you work hard or behave well or anything else. Just because you're you and you're here, and that's enough. Thomas looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, and Jonas saw something he hadn't seen before: hope. That night, for the first time since finding Thomas, Jonas slept peacefully. The cabin no longer felt empty. It felt like home. 3 weeks had passed since Jonas found Thomas, and the Wyoming wilderness was beginning to show signs of approaching winter. The morning air carried a bite that promised snow within the month, and Jonas knew he needed to make preparations for the long season ahead, preparations that now included planning for 2 instead of 1. Thomas had grown more comfortable in the cabin, though he still startled at unexpected sounds and positioned himself near exits wherever possible. Jonas recognized these habits as survival instincts that would take time to fade, if they ever did completely. He'd carried his own invisible scars for 15 years. He couldn't expect a traumatized 8-year-old to heal in mere weeks. We need to make a trip to town, Jonas announced over breakfast, watching carefully for Thomas's reaction. The boy's spoon paused halfway to his mouth, his eyes immediately taking on that wary expression Jonas had learned to recognize. What for? Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. Winter supplies, Jonas explained. Food, warmer clothes for you, ammunition, things we can't make or grow ourselves. What Jonas didn't say was that he also needed to ask questions about Thomas's family, to see if there were any relatives who might be looking for the boy. It was the responsible thing to do, even though the thought of giving up Thomas created an unexpected ache in his chest. Silver Creek was a small frontier town about 20 miles south of Jonas's cabin, consisting of a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses clustered around a main street that turned to mud whenever it rained. Jonas typically made the journey 3 or 4 times a year, conducting his business quickly and efficiently before returning to his solitude. This trip would be different. This trip, he wouldn't be alone. Thomas rode behind Jonas on the same horse that had carried him to safety weeks earlier, though now he sat with more confidence, no longer clinging desperately to Jonas's coat. The boy had filled out slightly under Jonas's care. His cheeks had regained some color, and his eyes had lost some of their haunted quality. Jonas, Thomas said, as they crested a hill that provided their first view of Silver Creek. What if someone recognizes me? It was a question Jonas had been dreading. We'll deal with whatever happens, he replied. But Thomas, you need to know if there are people looking for you. People who have a legal claim to you. I can't just keep you without their permission. He felt Thomas tense behind him. What if they're bad people? Then we'll figure out another way, Jonas promised. But let's not borrow trouble. Maybe there's nobody looking, or maybe there's someone good who's been worried sick about you. If you're enjoying the story and want to see how it develops, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Their first stop was Henderson's General Store, a cramped building that smelled of coffee, leather, and the various spices Mrs. Henderson used to make the store feel more welcoming. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up from her ledger when they entered. "Jonas McKinnon," she exclaimed. "Haven't seen you since spring." "And who's this young man?" "This is Thomas," Jonas said simply. "He's staying with me for a while." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly, but she was too polite to ask direct questions. Instead, she bustled around the store, helping them select warm clothes for Thomas and chatting about the weather, the approaching winter, and the various gossip from town. As they gathered their supplies, Jonas listened carefully to the conversation around them. Two men near the ammunition counter were discussing recent troubles with bandits along the eastern trade routes. A woman selecting fabric mentioned a family that had gone missing near the territorial border several weeks ago. "Terrible thing," she was saying to her companion. "The Hartwell family, nice folks, had a little farm east of here. Someone found their place burned out, but never found the bodies. Left behind a boy, I heard. But he disappeared too. Probably taken by whoever killed his parents." Jonas felt his blood run cold. He glanced at Thomas, who had gone very still, beside a display of candy. The boy's face was pale, but he showed no other reaction to overhearing his family's name. "What was the boy's name?" Jonas asked casually, moving closer to the women. "Thomas, I believe. Sweet child. About 8 years old. His uncle came through here last week, asking if anyone had seen him. Seemed genuinely concerned." Jonas felt Thomas's hand slip into his, small fingers gripping tightly. The gesture was so trusting, so completely dependent, that Jonas felt a fierce protective instinct surge through him. "This uncle," Jonas continued, "what was he like?" "Well-dressed man, claimed to be the boy's father's brother. Said he'd come to take Thomas back east to live with family. Seemed respectable enough, though there was something about his eyes. ... Double quotes." The woman trailed off, shaking her head. "Probably just my imagination." As they completed their purchases and loaded their supplies, Jonas's mind raced. The existence of an uncle complicated everything. If the man was legitimate family, Jonas had no legal right to keep Thomas. But the woman's comment about the uncle's eyes troubled him, and he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. On the ride back to the cabin, Thomas was unusually quiet. Finally, as they stopped to rest the horse beside a small stream, the boy spoke up. "That was my family they were talking about," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I figured as much," Jonas replied. "Thomas, do you know anything about this uncle?" Thomas shook his head. "Pa never talked about having a brother. Ma always said we didn't have any other family." Jonas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. In his experience, family members who appeared suddenly after a tragedy often had motivations that weren't entirely pure. He'd seen it happen before, distant relatives showing up to claim orphaned children, not out of love, but because children could work, could be sold, could be used. "What do you want to do?" Jonas asked. Thomas looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes. "I want to stay with you. You're the only family I got now." That night, as Thomas slept peacefully by the fire, Jonas sat in his chair and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He'd spent 15 years running from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility of loss. But some things were worth the risk. Some things were worth fighting for. The next morning, Jonas began teaching Thomas to shoot. "A man needs to be able to protect himself and those he cares about," Jonas explained as he showed Thomas how to hold the small rifle he'd purchased in town. "I hope you never have to use this knowledge, but I'd rather you have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Thomas was a natural marksman, his small hands steady and his eyes sharp. Jonas suspected the boy's recent trauma had aged him in ways that made him more focused, more serious than most children his age. "Why are you teaching me this?" Thomas asked after successfully hitting a series of targets Jonas had set up. Jonas was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "Because I think someone's coming for you, son. And when they do, I want you to be ready." The uncle arrived on a cold November morning when frost covered the cabin's windows like delicate lace. Jonas heard the horses before he saw them. 3 riders moving through the forest with the confidence of men who knew exactly where they were going. He'd been expecting this visit for 2 weeks, ever since their trip to Silver Creek, and he'd used that time to prepare. Thomas was in the back room, practicing his letters in the primer Jonas had bought for him. When Jonas whistled their agreed-upon warning signal, the boy immediately moved to the hiding spot they'd prepared, a cleverly concealed space behind the woodpile where he could see and hear everything while remaining hidden. Jonas opened the door before the men could knock, his rifle held casually but visibly at his side. The leader was a tall, well-dressed man in his 40s, with dark hair and calculating eyes. His companions looked like hired guns, hard men, with weapons and attitudes that suggested they were comfortable with violence. "You must be Jonas McKinnon," the leader said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm William Hartwell, and I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Can't say that I do," Jonas replied evenly. "What exactly are you looking for?" "My nephew, Thomas. I understand he's been staying with you since the tragic death of his parents. I've come to take him home." Jonas studied the man carefully. There was something about William Hartwell that set his teeth on edge. A practiced charm that felt calculated. Eyes that assessed everything in terms of value and usefulness. "Funny thing," Jonas said. "Thomas never mentioned having an uncle." William's smile faltered slightly. "We weren't close. My brother and I had a falling out years ago. But blood is blood, Mr. McKinnon. The boy belongs with family." "Is that so?" Jonas stepped onto the porch, forcing the three men to back up slightly. "And what kind of life are you planning to give him?" "A good one," William said smoothly. "Education, proper clothes, a chance to make something of himself. Surely, better than hiding in the wilderness with a hermit." The insult was carefully chosen, designed to provoke a reaction. Jonas recognized the tactic: make the opponent angry, get them to act rashly. Instead, he smiled. "Funny thing about hermits," Jonas said. "We tend to be real good judges of character. And right now, my character judgment is telling me that you're not here out of family concern." William's facade cracked slightly, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "The boy is my legal ward, Mr. McKinnon. I have documentation. You have no legal right to keep him." "Show me the documentation." William reached into his coat and produced a sheaf of papers. Jonas took them, noting immediately that they looked freshly drawn up and suspiciously official. The signatures were clear, the seals impressive, but something felt wrong. "These papers are dated 3 days ago," Jonas observed. "Convenient timing." "The legal process takes time," William said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Now, if you'll just get the boy, we can be on our way." "Here's the thing," Jonas said, handing the papers back. "Even if these documents are legitimate, which I doubt, I'm not handing Thomas over to anyone until I'm convinced it's in his best interest." One of William's companions, a scarred man with dead eyes, shifted slightly, his hand moving toward his gun. Jonas's rifle came up smoothly, not quite pointing at anyone but ready to be brought to bear instantly. "I wouldn't," Jonas said quietly. "Mr. McKinnon," William said, his voice taking on a hotter edge. "You're interfering with family business. That can be dangerous for a man living alone in the wilderness." It was a threat, plain and simple. Jonas felt a familiar cold clarity settle over him, the same feeling he'd had during the war, when violence became inevitable. "Thomas," he called, not taking his eyes off the three men. "Come on out here, son." Thomas emerged from his hiding place, his small rifle held with the competence Jonas had taught him. The boy's face was pale but determined, and he positioned himself slightly behind Jonas where he could cover the cabin's approaches. Well, William said, his mask slipping further. "Teaching children to be killers now, Mr. McKinnon." "Teaching children to protect themselves," Jonas corrected. "Thomas, do you know this man?" "No, sir," Thomas said clearly. "I had never seen him before in my life." "He claims to be your uncle." "Pa never had no brother," Thomas said firmly. "Ma told me once that Pa was an only child, just like me." William's face darkened. The boy is confused, traumatized. He doesn't remember clearly. "I remember everything," Thomas said, his young voice carrying surprising steel, "including the night you and your men killed my parents." The admission hung in the air like a physical blow. William's carefully constructed story crumbled, and Jonas saw the truth in the man's eyes. Not grief for a dead brother, but frustration at being caught in his lies. "You made a mistake coming here," Jonas said. "Should have cut your losses and moved on." The boy saw where his father hid the gold. William snarled, abandoning all pretense. 3 years I've been tracking that claim, and I'll be damned if I let some backwoods hermit keep me from it. If you've been following this story, leave a like and subscribe to help the channel grow. "There never was any gold," Thomas said. "Pa was a farmer, nothing more. Your father found a vein in the hills behind your farm," William continued. "He was planning to file a claim, make himself rich. But he died before he could tell anyone where it was, anyone except his son." Jonas understood now. This wasn't about family or legal custody. This was about greed. about men who would kill a family and terrorize a child for the possibility of gold that might not even exist. "Here's what's going to happen," Jonas said. "You're going to get back on your horses and ride away. If I ever see you near this cabin or near Thomas again, I'll kill you. That's not a threat, it's a promise." William laughed, but there was no humor in it. 3 against 1, old men are like our odds. "You're forgetting Thomas," Jonas said. "He's a better shot than most grown men, and he's got even more reason to see you dead than I do." For a moment, the two groups faced each other in tense silence. Jonas could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Violence was coming. He could smell it like smoke on the wind. William made his choice, going for his gun with the smooth motion of a professional gunfighter. But Jonas had been ready, had been expecting this moment since the 3 men arrived. His rifle spoke. First, the shot echoing across the forest like thunder. William spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. His companions hesitated for a crucial second, caught between fight and flight. That hesitation cost them. Jonas worked the lever action on his rifle, and Thomas's smaller weapon cracked from behind him. When the gun smoke cleared, William was wounded but alive, while his 2 companions lay motionless in the dirt. Jonas had aimed to disable, not kill, but he'd learned long ago that survival sometimes required hard choices. "You've got a choice," Jonas told William, who was trying to stop the bleeding from his shoulder. "You can ride away and never come back, or you can join your friends. What's it going to be?" William looked at his dead companions, at the determined faces of Jonas and Thomas, and apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. He struggled to his feet, climbed onto his horse with difficulty, and rode away without looking back. That evening, as they buried the 2 dead men behind the cabin, Thomas spoke quietly. "Are there going to be more?" "Maybe," Jonas admitted. "Men like that don't usually work alone. But we'll be ready for them." "Jonas." Thomas looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes. "Are we family now? Real family?" Jonas knelt down and pulled the boy into a fierce hug, feeling 15 years of loneliness and isolation melt away. "Real family," he confirmed. "No matter what comes, we face it together." As winter settled over the Wyoming territory, Jonas McKinnon and Thomas Hartwell prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. They'd found something in each other that neither had expected: a second chance at love, at family, at hope. The silence that had once been Jonas's only companion was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the warm presence of a son who'd chosen him just as surely as he'd chosen Thomas. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, forged in fire and sealed with love. In the spring, Jonas would formally adopt Thomas, making their bond legal as well as emotional. They would expand the cabin, start a small ranch, and build a life together in the wilderness they both loved. But for now, in the quiet warmth of their cabin, with snow falling softly outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, they were simply father and son, grateful for the unexpected gift of finding each other. The lonely hunter had indeed found his new reason to live, and in saving Thomas, he had ultimately saved himself. What did you think of this story of redemption and unexpected family bonds? Which part touched you the most? Jonas's initial loneliness, Thomas's courage, or their final confrontation with the false uncle? Leave your comment below. I love hearing your opinions and answering your questions. If you enjoyed this tale of the Old West and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.